on this particular issue is because the reason the Labour figures are so high is because it was a Labour proposal. And although this was a free vote, all the MPs were told there's no whipping, you vote absolutely with your conscience. It's completely a matter of conscience. If all the individual human beings who are MPs had voted solely on the basis of their conscience, you would expect that there wouldn't be much variation between the political parties, wouldn't you? But the reality is that it's a fairly consistent pattern that the Conservatives like to keep things as they are and aren't keen on dabbling in nature and doing things that are a bit too radical, whereas Labour and the Lib Dems are more tolerant to that. And in particular, the Labour MPs will have voted for it because some of them at least will have had the feeling, look, this might be a free vote, but as long as I don't step out of line in my political career, I've got a better chance of becoming a minister. I've got a better chance of getting a bigger salary, more power, more control. So even though they weren't told how to vote, they'll still do what they're implicitly told because it's probably going to be in their interest to be on side with the party if they want to further their electoral career. So that's what creates that particular differential. And I suspect we would have seen, had there been a different party in government, let's suppose the Tories were in government, well, for a start, this legislation would have never got on the books. There wouldn't have been a debate, there wouldn't have been a vote. But if there had, I think you would have found that the Labour vote was considerably lower because they weren't really voting with their conscience. They were still voting along the lines of a non-existent whip because they've got their own political careers to think about. And that applies really exclusively for Labour, actually, I think, in these figures, because, of course, they're the party of government.
So you're highlighting imperfections in the system, but you still think it's worth us trying to work through this system because
I think it's the only way forward.
Darren, the thing you're describing there, you also compared the political parties to McDonald's. I think you're very right to do that because it highlights one of the things. What you basically have is a system which trades complete conformity between individual sections of the system. But of course it then suffers the problem. You never go into a McDonald's and have an absolutely brilliant meal. The point is there's no experimentation, there's no difference in the system, there's no possibility for improvement half the time. No one's trying anything different, and if no one's trying anything different, you never necessarily find if something works better. Does the policies that work well in London work well in the north of Scotland if everyone has the same policies?
Quite, yeah.
No, they bloody don't. It would be
absolutely.
a good idea if... The other thing, actually, ironically, is that a political party that does have a plurality of views would actually probably be quite nicely electable nowadays. Because where you have a system of conformity, where everyone nicks everyone else's ideas and everyone looks the same, well, why not just represent everybody and have a plurality of views?
Yeah, well, the challenge with it is, and I hear absolutely what you're saying, I agree with you about being electable if you have a plurality of views. I think that's absolutely true. But the difficulty comes in how do you get the message across?
Yeah.
Because an important part of the election process is what we call the air war. That is TV news, the political interviews on television, radio interviews, and the national media. And because you've got this really powerful channel, and it's a hypnotic channel, it's television. It's a really very easy to underestimate just how powerful television can be. Because we have that national medium, you have to have a national message. You can't go on TV and say, well, sometimes we think this is the right approach, certainly for this end of the country anyway, but some of the time over there we think it's far too complicated. People need simplicity, and so that's why there is just a simple, consistent message on the most important issues.
You kind of want to have national as the most general sort of nationalistic messages, and then everyone else is on the local news, basically.
Yeah, well, one way that I think there's an increasing acceptance within political circles about this particular topic is one way to do it is through localization, through devolvement of power, first to regions, then to local authorities and counties. Certainly, I mean, you've got Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, of course, which have now all got devolved responsibilities. There is an increasing clamour towards localisation amongst the political parties. And yeah, I think you're probably right. At some point in the future we'll find that the House of Commons and our national parliament is responsible for less, and local assemblies are responsible for more. But it had a big setback in that process about, when was it, 10 years ago, when the North East had a referendum on whether they wanted to have a regional assembly, just like Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have, and they voted against it. And when the North East voted against it, that was the end of the project. I mean, the plan had been to create regional assemblies all over the country, precisely for that reason, so that you could have a different approach to things in the South West than you do in the North East. You know, the South West, Cornwall and Devon, very small, liberal kind of area, anything goes. Don't need to go into some of the details about the things that do go, but I'm sure you can imagine. Very relaxed about most things in life. Home counties, very different approach. You know, like things traditional, let's keep things as they always were. And so what's right for one part of the country probably isn't right for another part of the country. And that was the plan. The plan was we'll have regional assemblies all over the place, but people didn't want it.
Let's bring in some others.
Yeah, Dirk had a question.
I think one of the things that's very wrong with our current political system is there's lots of talk about checks and balances, but none of those checks and balances seem to lie with the public. I mean, we had, how many Labour supporters voted for 2 wars and an economic collapse? Especially since, now you're on the Iraq War, biggest demonstration in British history, 80% of the people voted against fighting the war, and it was just totally ignored.
Yeah.
There's no recourse to, get Blair out at the time.
Yeah, it's a real difficult.
A lot of the reason I think people are pissed off at politics and not interested is because you get one vote every 5 years and then screw you the rest of the time.
Yeah, well, again, there are some changes afoot that could potentially improve that situation. One is to give people the right to recall their MP. So if enough people petition the returning officer to say, we're fed up with our MP, we want to sack him, we want to get a new one. Because at the moment, MPs can't be sacked. I mean, there's nobody, there's no committee, there's no body, there's nobody at all can sack an MP. Once you're elected until the next general election, until the Queen dissolves Parliament. And there's no way back from that. But if we change the system so that people can say, I've had enough of my MP, I want rid of them, or want an election to elect a new one, then maybe, just maybe, that problem that you described there, Dirk, might be, the situation could be improved a bit. Because if your MP goes and votes for war in Iraq, and you don't want them to, then 1,000 people or so from the constituency can say, we want a by-election, and kick them out, and get a new one in.
How likely is that to
How many
happen?
MPs voting for that?
Exactly.
Well, it's official Lib Dem policy, and so when there's a whip, when it eventually comes to the vote, the Lib Dems will be voting for it. To be honest with you, I'm not sure where the other parties stand on that particular issue. I don't know. I wouldn't like to misquote them. How likely is it? Well, I think it's certainly possible. I mean, we are going to have a referendum on parliamentary reform, so there are changes afoot. If we can have elections to the House of Lords, and if we can change our voting system to alternative votes,
There are only going to be changes that suit the politicians.
Yeah.
So, Adam and then Suzanne.
I heard that the democracy in Norway is radically different to the rest of Europe.
Yeah, how is it in Norway?
Well, I've not checked online, but I heard that there aren't any what we would call parties, that just individuals run, and that they organise their cabinet. I mean, do you or anyone else in the room know about the way it works in Norway?
No, I'm not familiar with the Norwegian system at all, no.
Somebody can check that on Wikipedia, maybe.
Yeah.
Suzanne?
I'm just coming back to the issue with the localization, to take power away from the central government. Do you not think that's completely the wrong thing to do? Because a lot of these challenges facing humanity are challenges on a global scale. So do you not think having a more global political system would be, because if you localise things more and more, then it becomes more and more about local issues and less about the grand challenges like global warming and energy crisis?
Well, and that is an important dichotomy, because when you talk to the ordinary people in the street about what matters to them, it by and large isn't those international issues, those global issues. It is about the things that happen locally. And given that we want democracy, I mean, it's good, it's a nice safe way to run a country, in the sense that in general there's not too much bloodshed. You don't get rabid dictators going around dropping chemicals on people. What you have is a system where the politicians leave nicely when they get voted out. Because we like democracy, doing basically what the people want is a good way of running things and of running the country. And because the issues that matter to people are generally those local issues, it's their own families, their own friends, their workforce. I mean, if somebody that you work with is suffering in hospital with a condition, you may well go and visit them, and that's important, that's what matters. Whereas many of the issues that we're talking about that affect the world globally, it's not really what's on people's mind. Now, there are some individuals who are the exception to the rule, and they're the activists. There are some people who will develop, look at us in this room, for example, who have a passion for a very narrow subject, particular issue, and become